Hi everyone, welcome back. You are here for another week on the Brush by Brandy YouTube channel, and this week we're going to be working on this piece that's behind me. And this one I think tells a really cool story because this is a piece that I actually was given by a customer. It came to me in really poor condition. It's normally a piece that I would have passed on any day of the week, and I thought it was an important teaching piece because it was a chance for me to teach you guys some things that even sometimes the worst of the worst pieces that are in, really sad shape have some potential. And so this one came to me with a thick, old, gummy latex paint finish that was just awful. And it looked really sad. And so we're going to use good texture to camouflage all that bad texture. And so we're going to give this one a textured paint finish. But this one also, I was challenged kind of to use a color scheme that's probably not my normal wheelhouse. I really like the blues and the greens and the cool tones, and these are a little bit more warm and earthy for me, but this is the new Desert Sunset collection from Paint, and it actually really surprised me because it's like one of my favorite paint finishes, and I think it's because I stepped out of the box on a whole bunch of things. And that's kind of funny to me because it usually ends up that the pieces that challenge me the most end up being some of my favorites. So I liked kind of letting other things guide me in my direction and what decisions I made. I feel like the end result is really beautiful. You can tell behind me it kind of has a glow to it. So I'm excited to walk through this one with you. Let's go ahead and get started. Here's where I started on this piece. A customer gave me this one, and normally I wouldn't take pre-painted pieces, but this style was right up my alley, and I figured it was a really good training piece to show you guys some techniques on. This piece came to me missing hardware and with a really bad latex paint job on it. It had been already painted and really poorly by somebody in the past. It is possible to paint pieces that have already been painted before, but the key to them is you have to make sure that your base is in good condition before you lay any paint on top of it. If your paint is already chipping or peeling, anything you put over top of it is just as likely to chip or peel with the base underneath. So right away, I know a lot of prep work is going to go into this piece, and I did a lot of sanding. These drawers stuck where the thick latex paint was overlapping, and so I needed to sand down all of the drawer edges, the top, the bottom, and the sides, all around the drawer frames. And then I sanded the fronts of the drawers also to make them nice and smooth so that I could lay some paint over top. When I'm dealing with texture on a piece and there's no repairing it, I figure if you can't beat them, you might as well join them, right? So I'm going to join it. I'm going to take this bad texture and I'm going to turn it into good texture on this piece. We're going to be doing a textured paint finish. I started this piece on live video and I asked my live audience if they wanted me to do a wood stain top or if we should continue our paint technique onto the top. They all voted for a wood stain top, and so we're going to go ahead and strip down this paint from the top of this piece. I'm using Green Ease Stripper. I get this from Paint, and I'm going to lay on a nice thick coat of the Green Ease over my paint, and then I'm going to let it sit for about 15 to 30 minutes. While my stripper is sitting on the top, I'm going to come down and work on the body and start laying on my textured finish. What I'm going to be using is Paint mixed in with salt wash. Salt wash is a texture additive that you can mix into your paint to create a thickened version of your paint. You want to make sure that you add your salt wash slowly. You of course can't remove it once it's added, but I can always add more until I get the texture that I want. I want a fairly thick texture on this one, so I'm going to add quite a bit of salt wash, and then I'm going to stir it but still leave it a little rough. The more you stir the salt wash, the smoother of a creamy paste that you can create. So you can really create any texture you want with this. I'm mixing it into my Paint, and the color that I'm using is Earth. This is from their new Desert Sunset collection, and I used the darker color because I wanted it to cast some undertones and create some shadows in these crevices on my final paint finish. I'm just scraping this over the body of my furniture piece using a bowl scraper, which is actually a kitchen tool, but it works really great for this. And I'm using kind of a random pattern. I'm not trying to cover the blue completely because of course I'm still going to be adding paint. It's almost like scraping on a drywall texture. I try to get it as even as possible so that my texture is consistent over the body of my piece. I came back about 15 minutes later and look at the top of this piece. My paint has bubbled up with that Green Ease furniture stripper. I'm just using a metal scraping blade and I'm scraping off this first layer of paint. This is just the first layer. I did end up having to do 2 applications of the furniture stripper. The second one is going to get down and get the clear coat and some of the stain off of this piece, but this first one is just getting that paint off. For the curved edges, I just used my metal scraper and then I came back with a wire brush and scraped it out of all of those crevices. Stripping is not done in place of sanding, it's done in addition to sanding. So once this is all done, I'm going to need to clean this stripper all off and then give this a thorough sanding. Here's what my piece looked like with my textured finish all on. Let's go ahead and get some paint to cover this up. I'm using colors from the new Desert Sunset collection from Wiesel Paint, and it was kind of cool to use this collection because they're colors that would normally be out of my wheelhouse, but having them together in a collection, it kind of forced me to see them in a different light and to use colors that I might not use. You know what's funny is usually the pieces that are outside of my comfort zone end up being some of my favorite pieces that I've created, and I think this one falls into that category. I'm just laying on my base coat here, and my goal is to mostly cover up this textured finish. So I'm using the color Thunderstruck at the bottom, which is this deep gray with some purpley undertones, ivory in the middle, and then up at the top I'm using a color called Native Clay, which is this rich red. I'm just doing kind of a soft blend. I'm not fully covering up my texture because it's okay if that peeks through. I love this color combination. It feels very earthy and warm and natural. All right, and here is where my piece was with the texture, and then here is what it looks like with a little bit of paint on it. It already is a huge transformation, but this paint finish is not even done. This is just my base coat. So with my stripper all cleaned off, this is kind of where I landed on the top. It's still got some color on it. It definitely still needs a thorough sanding. So I'm going to take my Surf Prep sander. I start out with an 80 grit paper, and I'm going to take it down to the raw wood. After the 80 grit, I'm going to come back with a 120 and then a 220, and that gets my surface nice and prepared for a coat of wood stain. The flat surfaces are super easy, of course, but you can also get these curved edges using the Surf Prep sander. So what I do for this is I take my paper and I offset it just a little bit so it's hanging off the edge of my sander. And then I can use that paper and the edge of my sander and get into some of these deeper crevices. Once I had the majority of the color off the wood, I came back with one of my Surf Prep padded abrasives and I just smoothed out these edges so they were nice and smooth. This makes sure I preserve the curves of the edges, but still gets all of that goo out. I then had to use a scraper to get in the deepest part of this crevice because that my sander couldn't reach. Let's revisit our paint finish and get some of the final touches on this paint. So I've got my base down and it looks pretty good already, but now what I'm going to do is I'm going to do some dry brushing over the top. I really want to capture all of this interest that textured finish added. It's an advantage at this point. So I'm just taking a dry brush, which is a paintbrush that's loaded with very little paint. This is one of my Klingon S50 brushes, and the color that I'm using to start with is called Red Rock, and it's this rich, deep coral color, and when it's layered over the native clay, it just creates so much interest and so much depth. I'm going to continue dry brushing over the entire body of this piece, and each time I'm just using a color that contrasts a little bit with the color that I've got underneath. So I've got the native clay contrasting with the red rock. Over the ivory in the center, I'm going to use a little bit of yellow called fireside, and that's going to give some contrast there. So each layer just adds a little bit of interest and brings out some of the texture that we created on this piece. Let's get up close right here so you can really see what that dry brushing is doing. You can see how this light little bit of paint over the top really brings out that texture and makes it come to life. My top came out in really good condition. I'm really happy with it, but at one point it must have had a mirror with it because I've got 2 holes in the back of the dresser. I'm just going to fill them with a little bit of wood filler. This is a stainable wood filler, and you will be able to slightly see it when I add a little bit of stain. Wood filler never stains to exactly the same color as the body, but it's going to hide these and make it functionally perfect, and it's a little bit of character for a vintage piece. Here is my final paint finish when I've got all of the paint on and all of the dry brushing done. It kind of has a glow to it. But I'm going to take it one step further and add a little bit of glaze over the top of my paint. So I'm brushing on a little bit of glaze, and this is in the color black. I'm just going to brush it over the top of all my paint finish, and I'm digging it into all those deep crevices. In the end, I want all the glaze to sit in those deep crevices, and I'm going to wipe it back from the high points. This is going to emphasize that texture even more. I'm going to work in small areas because the glaze tends to set up, and once it's set up, it's harder to wipe away. I'm going to start off by wiping it away with a dry rag, and then I come back with a wet wipe and I clean it up even more. I did seal my paint with a satin clear coat before I'm wiping this back. I used Wise-Owl satin varnish, and I just wiped on a single coat with a sponge. What the clear coat does is it's going to seal off the pores of the paint so that I can wipe back my glaze nice and easily. Otherwise, the porous paint will tend to absorb whatever you put over top, and in this case, it would absorb that dark glaze, and I wouldn't be able to wipe it back as easily. When I get up close on this, you can really see how that dark glaze sunk into those crevices and emphasize them even more. But this isn't the final step. I am going to come back and do my dry brushing again, and that's just because I want to re-emphasize any areas that might have gotten darkened with the glaze so that those highlights on the very top points are nice and light. The glaze does darken up my overall paint finish a little bit, but I like how moody and deep and dark it made it. Here's a photo that shows up close on that right-handed drawer what a difference that glaze made in those deep dark crevices. So if you remember, this piece came to me with no hardware on it, so I need to figure out that situation. Well, I always keep all of my vintage hardware. If I ever replace it or I'm missing one, I keep what I have left because I may need it for a future piece, and that's exactly what happened here. I pulled out these poles from my stash, and they're going to work perfectly on this piece, but they were already painted, and I want to clean that off. So I just applied a little bit of citrus strip, and I let them sit overnight. When I came back the next day, all of this paint was loosened off. I used a wire brush and cleaned it out of the crevices, and these cleaned up to be a gold. I don't want gold hardware, so I'm going to go ahead and repaint these in a dark bronze color and use them. With my body just about complete, I need to flip this piece onto its back because I've got to pay attention to these legs. Now, I am taking a risk using some stripper up against the painted body of my piece. I'm just being really careful, and then I can always touch up any areas that I need to. I applied some of my greenies stripper to these legs, and then I'm just scraping with a wire brush to get it all out of the crevices. I cleaned them with some of the greenies cleaner, and these legs cleaned up really well. I added my same stain over top that I used on the top of the piece, which was Minwax Jacobian. It turned into this nice deep dark color. I'm really happy with them. With all of my wood areas done, a coat of stain on the top and on the legs, I can flip this piece back onto its legs, and let's get some clear coat over top. I'm using Wise-Owl varnish in matte, and I wanted this to have a nice flat finish because it's kind of a rustic looking piece. I didn't want to add any sheen to it. So I'm just using a lightly damp sponge, and I'm going to brush on a coat of my matte varnish over the top of my paint finish. I'm making sure that I get some into all those crevices that I created with that texture around the edge of my drawers. I want to make sure this piece is completely coated. I also am going to coat over the stained finishes on my piece. Once you wait 72 hours, you can coat over the top of an oil-based stain using a water-based clear coat. That's exactly what I'm going to do here. I chose to use a clear coat with a matte finish on this one because I want to keep it nice and rustic looking. Any sheen will tend to reflect off of all the different crevices in this surface, and so the matte is going to keep the light reflection minimal on this one, and that was the look I was going for. With my clear coat on, I added my vintage pulls and then 2 glass knobs at the top just for a nice decorative accent. And this piece is complete. You guys, I'm thrilled with this. Compared to the finish it started with that old crusty paint, this is a huge improvement. These colors are out of my wheelhouse, but they're absolutely eye-catching. Hope you guys have enjoyed this video. You can find links for everything I used in the description for this post. And as always, you can find more Brushed by Brandy on Facebook, Instagram, Pinterest, and YouTube, and my website at brushedbybrandy.com. I hope you'll click that subscribe button for a new tutorial every week on Brushed by Brandy.